Neptune is the 25th degree of Pisces for a period of time. And for around 6 weeks, it also coincides with the Trinity point. This is the midpoint of the 3 outer planets. And it is by no means frequently that Neptune conjuncts the Trinity point. So this is a sort of special symbol. And it's not so easy for us to understand exactly why this symbolism presents itself right now. It's not obvious in current affairs. And I think that's because it's a very hidden aspect of our psyche. So if we just consider Neptune itself being the force of creativity, where it's all an illusion, everything that's happening is an illusion, and we make it all up our own way. And how we do that is by composing a narrative. In other words, we see things and we hear things and we're told things and we then experience things, and it doesn't quite check out. There's no conformity between what we're told and what we're experiencing very often, partly because it's just told to us by people that are lying. They're trying to push their agenda, and this applies to most of the world, really. Other people really want us to know the truth the way they perceive the truth to be, thinking that that is the truth. And they're more sincere, but they are actually equally mistaken. And this includes most religious teachings, of course. Even quite advanced teachers are promoting within us the idea of self-revelation. And yet, that philosophy may well be understood, but to practice that, to put that into daily practice, this is not the same. And so the whole thing of being able to make up your own narrative is what Neptune's about, and it is not much understood. And one of my students recently made a lovely observation. He said, relationship itself is creativity. That's our creative expression. I can't get his words exactly right, but the idea is that whenever you're interacting with somebody else, creativity is occurring. You can't have relationship without making up some interpretation of what the other person thinks and feels and means by their words, and how they take your words and the influence you have upon them and they upon you. All of that is actually imaginary. We make all of that up. So that's Neptune. And it's going through Pisces 25, the purging of the priesthood, rooting out corruption. A multitude of minor and major ego adjustments add up to a life of interactions with family and associates. Yet these are not sufficient to deal with core issues of shadow, to go to another level of awareness where we see ourselves for what we are and let go of the deepest imperfection of being. We need to experience purification. Very often, this is by fire, in other words, catharsis. We live in a very dark and terrible age, and we have to release ourselves from the expectation that that darkness will engulf us. There is hope for the courageous, determined, passionate aspirant. And with these qualities, we can be free of the corruption that has blinded us from soul consciousness. So the purging of the priesthood is an historical event that occurred in the time of Henry VIII, when what was going on in the monasteries particularly is the accumulation of wealth and power. And the exaltation of that was the Pope. And Henry VIII, for personal reasons, but nevertheless on the button, tried to purge the priesthood, tried to purge this imperfection of integrity out of the church. Now, we're not going to be able to do that with the church. I think that's a misunderstanding of the purpose of the church. The church isn't really to awaken us. That's not its fundamental purpose. Its purpose is to be a counterbalance in juxtaposition to government. Without the church, then the government would run riot. And so we've got to see the church as a political institution. All the religions are. What awakens us, however, to a higher level of full realization of the nature of reality is purification. Each of us is impure. We cannot be in a purified state of being and draw breath. It's just not the place for it. This world is corrupted fully, almost. So what we're trying to do is to examine bit by bit those imperfections within ourselves which are preventing us from going to the next step, the next level, which might be small. It might just be a decision you want to make to move into another way of life, to move away from a problem towards a visionary solution. It might be simple like that, but you can't do it because maybe you have fear, maybe you have confusion. Now, these are imperfections of being, and they need to be rooted out. And you can't do that if you're denying them. So the stage that we have to go through first is to acknowledge that we are less than perfect. And so obvious to everyone that that's the case, nonetheless, most people won't do that, don't do that. Now, they may well have a very humble side and a realistic self-appraisal for 95% of their personality qualities, but the little bit that they can't get right is that which is blocking them right now. And I think that's generally true. So when Neptune comes along and acts through this energy, it's not like Pluto, it's not like Uranus, it's not like Saturn. It's Neptune, which is very soft and amorphous and fluid and ill-defined, and giving you enough room to make it all up, to be creative in your interpretation of what's going on. And here we come to the secret, really, of this degree, I think, that there is no need for you to identify with your problems as problems. They're not. They're energy configurations. For that energy configuration to become a problem, it has to be a distortion of your thinking that does that. This is such a powerful and subtle understanding that we need to get it right. Everything that we experience by way of pain and trouble and problem and all is just a mindset, a tangling of the synapses in the brain. And all we have to do is to untangle them. And that isn't so very difficult, actually. Impossible if you don't know that they're there, but relatively straightforward if you do. This is my main work, is to identify the denials that people have of their tangled thinking, and just to offer another way of perceiving what they have been perceiving as painful or problematic. Now, with Neptune in this particular degree, it's smoother, it's easier, there's no resistance. Neptune doesn't resist anything. So it's a time for us just to look deeply into our deepest problems and to root out that which is not pure, good and light. And to do that as an exercise of healing. It's not a cathartic episode. It's gentle, because it's Neptune. Whatever else Neptune is, it's very gentle indeed. It refuses to engage with issues that are going to challenge its fluidity. It's the ocean. It just flows around. Now, I'm going to read what Rudyard says about Pisces 25. He has the title a bit differently. A religious organization succeeds in overcoming the corrupting influence of perverted practices and materialized ideals. Every man is a church that has the soul as its God. Isn't that a lovely idea? We individually are our own church, praying to the soul, our own God. But most men forget the soul and live according to dogmatic rules and habits, which not only have become empty of inner meaning, but very often have been perverted by the demands of the senses and the emotional nature, and by the ego with its rationalizing intellect. A purging or catharsis is needed to restore not only fresh and creative spontaneity, but even more the contact with the soul and God-ordained Dharma. So, whereas Henry VIII was dealing with the church itself as an institution, the image of this Sabian symbol can be taken as a metaphor for the self. And if we are our own church and we have our own imperfections, we need to purge them, clean it out, if the soul is to find safe haven within the ego and the body and the personality. So this whole idea of purging and cleansing is central to this degree, and yet Neptune is operating through it, and so it needs to be more subtle, and it needs to be on the level of your relationship to your spirituality. And it staggers me to understand how few people dedicate time to awakening. When you think about how much time they dedicate to their careers and their families and their sports and hobbies and drinking, and yet very little time to the main purpose of incarnation, which is awakening. We've just forgotten, as a species, we've forgotten the purpose of coming here, which is to bring this physical body and its gross personality up a bit. If you move forward a bit, that's fine, that's enough, But some people want to go the whole hog and awaken. And if you can awaken in this lifetime, that's a tremendous achievement. It's worth everything else that you've ever done in your whole life. Nothing remotely compares to the glory of being that you feel if you reach that level of being an awakened being. So here's a real opportunity around this time, and taking us up to Christmas probably, that we've got a real opportunity to move through a few more steps towards that precious goal of awakening. Let's give some thought now to the significance of Neptune being also in the same position exactly as the Trinity point. Now that means that Uranus and Pluto are exactly the same distance away from Neptune, such that their midpoint conjuncts Neptune's. When this happens, a collectivity of resonance occurs. So there's an intensification. Uranus and Pluto are also acting in through this Neptunian energy and through therefore the 25 degrees of Pisces. So we're conjoining freedom and evolution with our creativity in a very particular way during this 6-week period approaching Christmas. How then do we purify ourselves to reach a greater purity of awareness, of awakened awareness? How do we do that? By being more free so that we can evolve. Basically, keywords unlock consciousness. That's why they're called keywords, I think. They give you a clue to a deeper hidden meaning within a metaphor or a symbol. So here we have Uranus, whose keyword I'm using as freedom, and Pluto, whose keyword I'm using as evolution. If we are not being creative, the Neptune keyword, it is because our freedom is blocked, or because we are refraining from evolving or refusing to evolve. Now we need to look at that. As I said earlier, it's the denial of our imperfections that holds them in place. As soon as you've actually given consciousness to a shadow area and then added the intention to clear that, to purify yourself of that, it begins to move. And there may well come a time when there does need to be a catharsis, but it begins to move, and that's the important thing. If there's movement, then there's life. So that part of us which is imperfect and prevents us from reaching an awakened state of awareness needs to be moved now by claiming freedom, by claiming evolution. How do we know whether we're evolving? Well, you look back a year at your life, you think about how you were dealing with things back then, and you think to yourself, Am I just doing the same old, same old? Am I going around in circles? Or am I progressed? Am I a bit further along on the spiral of evolution? If you're further along, it doesn't matter how far, then you are evolving. If you're not, and you're doing pretty much exactly the same thing, you're in the same rut with the same wrong partner and the same wrong job and the same wrong living circumstances, then you're not evolving, you're stuck. That needs to be dealt with. And if you don't deal with it willingly, Pluto will give you a helping hand, or more like a punch in the face. In the case of Uranus, are you free? And most people perhaps say, yes, I'm free, but would not behave spontaneously. They would consider their choices of response and consider that to be freedom. Fair enough if you consider it to something less free, but true freedom is spontaneity. You immediately do what you feel like doing, moment by moment, throughout your life. And I've said this to people and they get angry with me. Oh, how could you be free? I've got responsibilities. It's like, when you ask that kind of question, a rhetorical question, how can I be free? So I was like, well, ask the question without rhetoric. Ask the question, how can I be free? And you start introducing a strategy to move away from being stuck in an unevolved state towards being immediately spontaneous and creative. And there it is. That's the awakened state. That's what it is, where freedom, evolution, and creativity simultaneously occur all of the time. And in this case, the clue is, the reason it's not happening for you, for us, is that there's a little bit more purification to do. We've got to purge the priesthood. In other words, we've got to deal with that part of us that doesn't know sacredness. We have to have something sacred in our lives. It's an aspect of a healthy soul and a healthy psyche to know what sacredness is. And actually, this is the secret, to prioritize it. So if you don't hold anything sacred, and if you don't prioritize that which is sacred, then there's a purification to do. And now's a good time. And we do that by claiming freedom and making sure that we're going through evolutionary processes of growth.